I can't make any judgment standing outside.
No,
No, no. We're trying to make a practical accommodation.
And you are trying to create a problem in
Not
this
at all.
situation between Iraq and the United States of America
Not
and
at
the
all.
threat of military aggression. But we are stick on the legal interpretation of the agreement between Iraqi government and the special commission.
Okay. Let me be very clear.
Yes.
I'm not interested in any words of aggression about America. I'm not American. I'm here as a member of the United Nations doing a job. Now, between us, we've never had this problem before. So I'd appreciate it if you don't raise it again, because that is not my job. This is about access. And we have been delayed outside this site now for 2 hours.
I have no change in my position. We insist on getting the letter requested from you, and we shall address this problem to the party leadership.
Okay. Iraq promised the Security Council that it would provide access to members of the inspection teams in the performance of their duties. I understand your position, Mr. Hassam Amin, but at this time I will be withdrawing my team back to the BNVC.
It's up to you.
Thank you.
Earlier today, I ordered America's armed forces to strike military and security targets in Iraq. Their mission is to attack Iraq's nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons programs and its military capacity to threaten its neighbors. The international community gave Saddam one last chance to resume cooperation with the weapons inspectors. Saddam has failed to seize the chance. And so we had to act, and act now.
On October 24, 1945, representatives from 51 nations convened to ratify the formation of the United Nations, an international authority dedicated to the ideals of peaceful cooperation and collective security. The UN stood to ensure that no one nation's sovereign rights would be infringed upon by the desires of another. In August of 1990, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded the sovereign nation of Kuwait. The world community almost unanimously condemned the invasion and demanded Iraqi withdrawal. Never before in the history of the United Nations had one member nation invaded and attempted to absorb another.
I feel that it is my moral duty as Secretary General of the United Nations, a peaceful organization, to do everything in order to avoid the worst.
The United Nations first acted to stem the invasion without force. The Security Council imposed a strict program of economic sanctions on Iraq. In particular, these sanctions cut off oil exports, which cost Iraq nearly $60 million a day and cast the country into economic turmoil. As the sanctions wore on, the United Nations authorized a United States-led coalition of 29 countries to apply military force if the sanctions failed to remove Saddam from Kuwait. In January 1991, Saddam Hussein's obstinacy and defiance rendered that force necessary.
Tonight, the Kuwaiti flag once again flies above the capital of a free and sovereign nation, and the American flag flies above our embassy.
The coalition successfully enforced the UN Security Council mandate. However, the UN mandate did not provide for the removal of Saddam Hussein. At the end of the war, and much to the chagrin of many in the US, Iraq legally remained a sovereign state, and Saddam's regime remained intact. The Security Council did agree that Saddam continued to pose a threat to the region, and in particular, they were concerned with his weapons of mass destruction. The Security Council passed Resolution 687. This document called for Iraq to declare fully its holdings of chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons, as well as its ballistic missiles. The resolution also called for the creation of the United Nations Special Commission, or UNSCOM, to verify Iraq's declarations, to oversee the destruction of these weapons, and to set up a system of long-term monitoring to guard against future reconstitution of these programs. The resolution states that once all of these criteria have been met, the Security Council will release Iraq from the stranglehold of economic sanctions. The man picked to head the Special Commission was Swedish Ambassador Rolf Ekéus, a world-class diplomat with an extensive resume in the field of disarmament.
My belief that the ceasefire resolution, which contained the very simple deal, Iraq, you give up your weapons of mass destruction, and from the UN side or from the coalition side, we should allow you to get back to your oil exports. As we know, Iraq is has one of the largest reserves in the world, oil, and certainly I calculated that this was a deal Iraq couldn't refuse. I saw, therefore, the job of weapons as a purely technical job. I didn't see any political ramification.
Ekéus began to assemble a team from among the most respected technical experts in the world.
We were focusing upon recruiting our specialists from countries which had the knowledge of the weapons. US, obviously, United Kingdom, obviously, France, Russia, but also Germany. There were no diplomats, there were no political types. So that reflected our belief that our job was to certify Iraq's declaration and supervise the destruction. And we expected full cooperation by Iraq.
On April 18, 1991, Iraq submitted the first declaration of its weapons of mass destruction to the Special Commission. Inspectors began the process of accounting for and destroying these weapons. Missing from the Iraqi declaration, however, was any mention of biological or nuclear weapons, programs that many in UNSCOM believed to exist.
Of course, the very first inspection showed that Iraq's declarations were woefully far from the truth. And that then put the whole operation on a different footing, which is one of digging out the truth, not of verifying a presented fact.
It became apparent that in order to perform the duties of its mandate, UNSCOM would have to seek out information from other sources.
We were depending upon governments to provide us with what they could have assembled over the years. I started, I think, on my third day to write a letter to some 60 states. We got only one answer. That was from the United States government, which sent us some data.
The CIA was able to provide Ekéus with a spectacular lead. An undeclared stockpile of nuclear enrichment equipment secreted away in a military barracks on the outskirts of Baghdad.
Colonel, I don't want to go inside to an empty site. I want to go into a site that had the vehicles that I observed and photographed that were here at 0730 hours.
The inspection team was barred from entrance. A convoy of trucks was seen to be loaded with items of crates and materials and then leave the compound. Elements of the team chased the convoy and had shots fired across their path. So there was a fairly strong feeling that there was something there that was being hidden from the inspectors.
From the day we started to get these misleading information, understood that we were misled, we also had to see to it that this problem was understood by the Council with its 5 permanent members and its 10 non-permanent members.
The Security Council passed a new, more pointed resolution condemning Iraq's flagrant violation.
The sense of outrage in the Council was so strong that whereas Resolution 687 was passed by 13 votes and 2 abstentions, Resolution 707, which is much more strong in its language against Iraq, and is the first time ever that any country in the world has been banned from having any form of nuclear program, civil or military. This resolution was passed unanimously, 15 votes to 0. The genesis of it was absolute outrage at the behavior of Iraq, knowledge that Iraq was lying and that there were hidden serious weapons programs there to be discovered, and Iraq's physical threat to the safety and welfare of the inspection teams that resulted in giving UNSCOM much clearer rights for inspection of anywhere, anytime, with any instrument, using any means, using their own aircraft, their own vehicles, and much greater prohibitions on Iraq.
With new powers conferred upon it by the Security Council, UNSCOM and its mission would need to take on a somewhat more aggressive form. ICAEUS brought in Scott Ritter, a former Marine captain who had worked as a weapons inspector in Russia and as an intelligence analyst during the Gulf War. Ritter was charged with the creation of an internal intelligence gathering unit.
I mean, the creation of the Information Assessment Unit, the IAU, was designed to do a couple of things. One, it was to create a cell within UNSCOM that was dedicated to the analysis of intelligence information. You can't ask nations to provide you with sensitive information if you don't have the wherewithal to receive it, to store it, to process it, to assess it, to use it properly. So by creating the IAU, Rolf ICAEUS was saying, look, we're a capable, legitimate organization. We're grown-ups, we're adults. Give us this data. 2, you achieve the kind of independence required to be a legitimate United Nations organization. You can't have one nation or a group of nations directing the work of a United Nations outfit.
The 2 principal supporters of UNSCOM, the US and the UK, were violently against the creation of the Information Assessment Unit within UNSCOM, because they didn't want to have a duplication of the task that they saw they were doing on UNSCOM's behalf.
Rolf ICAEUS understood there was no way UNSCOM could succeed without the active support of the French, the Chinese, the Russians, and other members of the Security Council, that this couldn't be an American-only affair. That would be the end of UNSCOM. UNSCOM could never survive if it was truly controlled by the United States. So Rolf ICAEUS refused to back down. He said, we'll go on without you, with or without you, but we're moving on. I think cooler heads prevailed in Washington, D.C., and the decision was taken that, no, if Rolf ICAEUS wants the IAU, we'll respect that and we'll work with the IAU. And so I'd say after about a month and a half of very uncomfortable relationships, the United States came on board, and you know, I think the U.S. took the position, you know, if you can't beat them, join them.
Utilizing a combination of American and independent intelligence capabilities, Ritter began to further investigate the Iraqi declarations.
We felt that there was a significant reason to doubt the Iraqi declaration, but we didn't have the smoking gun per se. There wasn't indisputable evidence that proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Iraq had this. This was an assessment. This was analysis. This wasn't hard, factual information.
Then, in January 1992, in secret briefings with UNSCOM, the U.S. released satellite photos that showed definitively the presence of 4 missile launchers that Iraq had not originally declared.
Rolf ICAEUS then turned to others in the Security Council and hinted that we had the smoking gun, that there was no doubt that the Iraqis were lying, and that UNSCOM was going to pursue this issue until its obvious conclusion.
In parallel with the Security Council meeting, where it became evident that the US fleet was sailing up the Persian Gulf towards Iraq, with the obvious implication that there may well be military action.
We felt that this was it. This was going to be the trigger for war. We were going to go into Iraq. There was no way the Iraqis were going to cooperate. and the hammer was going to come down. We felt we were on the verge of a second Gulf War.
Suddenly, the Iraqi government came out with a new set of declarations, which, especially in the missile field, which differed from their first declarations.
Narrowly averting a military confrontation, Iraqi officials now claimed that they had kept nearly 100 illegal Scud missiles from the inspectors, but that they had destroyed and buried these missiles in secret in the summer of 1991.
Scott, we have the first missile number.
We were back to square one. Iraq provided a declaration. We were now going into Iraq to verify the totality and the veracity of this declaration.
There was a changeover of the Iraqi personnel in late 91, early 92, when General Ahmad Rashid al-Obaidi took over pretty much as the front man on the non-nuclear issues. And it was presented that he was the new face, that Iraq had made mistakes with UNSCOM in its dealings in the past, but this was the new chapter of openness, a new beginning.
Towards the end of 91, we had strict instruction from our leadership, from our government at the time, to make sure that we fulfill all our obligation under Section C of Resolution 687. And at the time, I was the man responsible for this. And I remember we made sure by almost November, I think, of 91, that all what is needed by that resolution was fulfilled.
But despite its new face, Iraq's posture failed to fully convince the inspectors.
Once Iraq started down the path of lying, the standards of verification become much more stringent.
The Al-Nida launchers, you declared, with your original declaration, you declared 2. You've now come and declared 4 additional. There was something as big and important as a launcher to say that there was a confused situation and you didn't know where 4 launchers were when you made your original declaration. This brings into question all the numbers associated with the Scud program, especially concerning the operational Scud force, and this is why we need the level of information that we request.
We'd been told the big lie, so we felt we needed documents that not only proved that Iraq destroyed this material, but we needed documents that backed up the intent of Iraq to show that there was no ill intent. We needed documents pertaining to orders issued to military units to destroy missiles. We needed documents pertaining to the political decision made by the government of Iraq to get rid of these missiles.
UNSCOM had to turn to the document trail to try and get a fuller picture of what Iraq actually had done. And that's why the emphasis then went from inspections and verification of Iraqi declarations to looking for documentations, which were looking for the archives in particular, which would give UNSCOM the big picture of what they should be counting down from in their verification and destruction efforts.
And in June of 1992, we received a tip from British intelligence that said, yes, we do have information. We think the archives located in one of 3 locations in downtown Baghdad. So we excitedly put together a team and went to Baghdad and launched a surprise inspection of the first of these 3 sites. And we drove up to this location, we surrounded it very aggressively, and we were moving in to inspect, and the Iraqis immediately stopped us, said, you can't come in. I said, why not? They said, this is the Ministry of Agriculture. Inspectors are not allowed inside a ministry.
As per standard practice in these issues of standoffs, UNSCOM went to the Security Council and said, this is the situation. And the normal Security Council reaction to that would be to issue a presidential statement demanding that Iraq permit access and threatening serious consequences should Iraq not comply. Now, serious consequences was the language that said that there would be military intervention.
But then, to the surprise of everyone, the U.S. delegate, the ambassador of the United States, raised his hand and said, I don't think we should talk about serious consequences. And, you know, the shock among the others, the Brits and French and Russians who were supporting us in this was tremendous. But US didn't want to have that language, and so it was taken out. So it's talked about a serious violation, but not about serious consequences.
This sent a very strong signal to the Iraqis that the principal supporter and the sole participant able of launching a military attack on Iraq was not prepared to do so. It emboldened them to further challenge UNSCOM and this particular inspection.
To the Iraqis, this is a part of their state. It's something that is a symbol of the sovereignty and the independence and the dignity of Iraq. And the Iraqis felt that not only the Ministry of Agriculture, but all ministries, all symbols of state, were off limits to these inspectors. And the situation on the ground was deteriorating. I mean, we're sitting here surrounding the facility, and surrounding us are thousands of screaming demonstrators. Became a very, very uncomfortable situation. We were convinced that the Americans were behind this inspection 100%, and that if we were stopped, that the kind of mechanism that existed in March of 1991 would kick in. The Security Council would immediately condemn Iraq for its failure to cooperate, and the United States would make it clear that the price Iraq would pay would be significant, primarily through the resumption of military action.
They didn't think through the consequences of them not appearing to support or appearing to retract support for UNSCOM, and the damage that that very public removal of the language would do to UNSCOM's cause.
To this day, I cannot come up with a reason why the United States behaved the way it did in the summer of 1992. They knew the mission we were on, they supported the mission we were on, they provided qualified inspectors to be part of this mission. And when we succeeded, we found the archive, we surrounded the building, they did nothing. And I just have no explanation for this action. I can't think of any explanation, and none has been provided that satisfactorily explains why the U.S. Failed to respond decisively.
After the disappointment of the Ministry of Agriculture inspection, many in UNSCOM were convinced that the days of confrontational document searches were over. The inspectors felt they had to do something to regain the respect of the Iraqi government, and they needed to show the Security Council that they were not about to give up.
Okay, we're not going to get the documents that allow us to verify with one wave of the magic wand all of Iraq's declarations. So what do? We start attacking their declarations from a technical standpoint. And we organized technical inspection teams to go into Iraq to carry out very and thorough investigations. But these were investigations about, did Iraq declare all of its fuels for Scud missiles? So we sent inspectors into Iraq to take fuel samples, not only out of fuel containers, but in all of their petrochemical facilities, to take fuel samples out to find out if they could produce fuels for ballistic missiles. We went into industrial facilities and examined their capability to produce parts for ballistic missiles. It was just a total, very wide spectrum investigation, and guess what? We were in a position to declare Iraq disarmed in ballistic missiles and move on to the monitoring phase.
UNSCOM began to set up systems for the long-term monitoring of Iraq's industrial capabilities in order to prevent any reconstitution of Iraq's missile force. So successful were the missile team's inspections that other departments within UNSCOM began to follow their lead.
Suddenly you found, going to Iraq, technical teams from the chemical field, technical teams of biologists, technical teams from the nuclear field. They were all engaged in similar type activities. We have teams going in, destroying Iraq's stockpile of chemical weapons, coming to grips with the civilian chemical sites that could be used in prohibited activities. So UNSCOM is having success on a wide front. We're coming to closure on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs. It's a very exciting time to be in UNSCOM.
While UNSCOM continued to investigate questions in the chemical, biological, and nuclear fields, Ralph Achaeus was prepared to write in his report to the Security Council that UNSCOM had accounted for all of Iraq's ballistic missiles.
Well, this assessment we were criticized for, and U.S. was one of the governments which challenged us, said we had more, hundreds, maybe more. Of course, my immediate response was show us where we should look. I don't say they should show us exactly, but give us the indication, how do you know it? And give us the facts behind your assessment. And that the U.S. wasn't prepared to give us, or couldn't give us, we now know. Because this assessment had proven to be fundamentally correct.
As Ralph Achaeus is preparing to write a report to the Security Council about the findings of the inspection team, the United States sends a memorandum from the CIA addressing Iraq's ballistic missile programs. The extent of the letter was that, look, we don't trust the Iraqis. They're known liars. They've lied in the past, and we have no reason to believe that they're telling the truth now. Therefore, we just disregard the entire results of your inspection team. We think it's wrong. We think it's null. We think it's void. We think Iraq has 200 ballistic missiles left, and we won't accept any assessment from UNSCOM that doesn't mirror this, mirror our own assessment. And after a series of meetings with the CIA, suddenly a briefing was provided. We have very sensitive information that says Iraq is hiding these ballistic missiles in underground facilities.
Now forced to disregard their own assessments in favor of the CIA's sudden assertion, UNSCOM inspectors had no choice but to return to the fields of Iraq. Their mandate was the same, to uncover the truth, but that truth would prove increasingly elusive as this new round of inspections wore on. Rising to meet the CIA's challenge, the UNSCOM inspection mechanism took on a more high-tech appearance. The familiar white UN helicopters were refitted with sophisticated ground-penetrating radar, designed to scan huge swaths of the Iraqi desert.
One of two things would happen. A, we would either find the missiles buried underground, which is a great success. Or B, we'd find nothing, and the U.S. couldn't challenge that response.
The radar-equipped helicopters flew over Iraq for nearly 2 months at the behest of the CIA, probing the landscape below for any signs of the hidden missiles.
And we found nothing. There were no missiles buried under the ground. Rather than embracing the conclusions that UNSCOM had, the U.S. said, we think there's 12 to 20 missiles, and that's what you have to find. We were back to square one. Very frustrating. There's a lot of people, myself included, who began to say, look, they're just going to continue shifting the lines. They're going to continue fabricating assessments because they don't want Iraq disarmed. They don't want to deal with the reality of a disarmed Iraq. And as an inspector whose job is to carry out the mandate of Security Council, this was an unacceptable situation.
There was increasing pressure from those who were the biggest creditors of Iraq, Russia and France, that the process had gone on long enough. UNSCOM couldn't be expected to find any more, and therefore the sanctions should be eased.
We're in a increasingly difficult situation where Russia, France, China were saying, hey, look, enough's enough. Come on, guys. We've been doing this for a couple years now. Do you got any smoking guns? No. Game's up. Game's over. Declare Iraq disarmed, let's move on.
But the pressure was equally on UNSCOM not to rush into such a declaration from the US and UK, who still harbored serious doubts.
Despite the fact that we had tremendous success in the field of ballistic missiles, we weren't as sure about our assessments concerning Iraq's chemical, biological, and nuclear capability. We needed new data, and we needed data bad. In early 1994, Israel started insinuating they're ready to help the Special Commission. So we entered into technical discussions with the Israelis. The Israelis sent over teams to New York who met with the various experts, and they just provided a vast amount of new information. One of the most spectacular being in the field of biological weapons.
I think that created a serious turmoil and problem, because biological weapons had been the ultimate secret, something Iraq had defended at all costs, even if they cooperated in other fields. There they were stalling.
France and Russia, who wanted the sanctions lifted, went to Iraq and said, you have to come clean. And that pressure paid off in a declaration in June by Iraq that it had a biological weapons program.
The program was completely obliterated even before inspectors came to Iraq for the first time. It was completely obliterated. And what was not declared was information about it. And that's all.
And once they admitted the biological weapons program, our inspectors just started putting the pressure on the Iraqis, and more and more and more admissions were made.
The disclosure of Iraq's chemical weapons program and its destruction. The tracking down of pretty much all of the ballistic missiles and their destruction. The destruction of materials for their production and for the destruction of production of chemical weapons were all achieved. With a great deal of input from UNSCOM, the IEA had tracked down not just uranium enrichment programs, but an entire weaponization plant at Al Athia. All of that had been destroyed and accounted for, and materials removed from Iraq. So the achievements were absolutely spectacular, way beyond what any of the original architects of UNSCOM had ever imagined.
To the point where by the summer of 1995, we were starting to get comfortable with our understanding of the totality of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs. We didn't have 100% confirmation about everything that had been destroyed, but we were able to ascertain that 90% of it was accounted for. And when you're talking about weapons of mass destruction, 90% means that you have eliminated their ability to produce weapons, that they don't have any weapons left, and the final percentages that remain are just the useless vestiges of former past programs, which in their totality mean nothing. So we had fundamentally disarmed Iraq.
We have been asked to agree to 687. We agreed. We have been asked to fulfill. We fulfilled. Now it is the turn of the other side also to fulfill. It's part of the deal.
And Iraq had at that stage been sort of made aware of paragraph 22 of 687 resolution, namely the resolution that said if the Security Council is satisfied with Iraq's accounting for Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, the prohibition against oil import from Iraq should be lifted. So it was a key element for bringing Iraq back to the international economy and restore Iraq's, so to say, economy and social life.
The Iraqis confronted Achaeus, pleading that with their entire war machine finally laid bare, the time had come for the Security Council to reward their compliance. The Iraqis threatened that if sanctions were not lifted as promised, they would discontinue their cooperation with UNSCOM.
And I think at that particular time, the executive chairman, Rolf Achaeus, was basically running out of ideas, and there was increasing political pressure to bring the work of UNSCOM to an end. We hadn't found anything, inspection after inspection after inspection.
Stopped tantalizingly short of fulfilling its mandate, UNSCOM found itself caught between growing international outcry to lift sanctions and the dubious skepticism of the United States. On August 8, 1995, an entrance was made on the world stage that would have spectacular repercussions for UNSCOM and Iraq. General Hussein Kamal, a trusted presidential advisor and Saddam Hussein's own son-in-law, defected to the West. Kamal had been the man in charge of building Iraq's arsenal of weapons of mass destruction. Besides Saddam himself, no man alive knew more about the secrets of Iraq's weapons.
And Iraq contacted me immediately after the defection, if I may call it, and said, you must come to Baghdad, and if you go first and talk to this Hussein Kamal, we will see it as an unfriendly act, so come first to us.
Ekeas traveled to Iraq, where he was escorted to Hussein Kamal's chicken farm located on the outskirts of Baghdad.
And lo and behold, when they open up the chicken farm, they find boxes and crates full of documents. It's the archive, the hidden archive, the one UNSCOM had been searching for since the summer of 1992. The data UNSCOM needed to confirm its findings or to challenge Iraq's statements was there laid before the Special Commission. And it soon became clear to us that, that as we waded through these millions of pages of documents, there was no more smoking gun, that Iraq was probably fully disarmed.
As the inspectors continued to check the Iraqi declarations against the information contained in the archive, Ralph Ekeas and his team traveled to Amman and met with the defector Hussein Kamal. Kamal corroborated what UNSCOM had found during its technical inspections, that Iraq had, indeed, destroyed all of its prohibited weapons.
But everything wasn't rosy with the Hussein Kamal declaration. For in addition to his statement that everything had been destroyed, when he talked about these documents, when he talked about the computer disks and the production molds, he said they were being concealed in Iraq by presidential security forces, the Special Republican Guard, under control of Saddam Hussein's son, Qusay, and that this was a concerted effort directed at specifically misleading the Special Commission, of concealing information from the Special Commission.
So we started where some of our inspectors, Nikita Smith, Scott Ritter and others, started to analyze how did Iraq conceal this. We had to go after the method to hide. I felt it was so important because this was a final, so to say, element we needed to get the full picture. So we could declare that we had completed our task.
The search for Iraqi concealment led inspectors into the heart of Baghdad and often to the very doorstep of the Iraqi leadership.
We're being prevented from taking the video still. There are armed guards outside this facility.
Please, I told you one thing.
From the very beginning of these new inspections, UNSCOM found itself in one confrontation after another. The Iraqis began denying access, claiming that these were sensitive sites and were therefore off limits to the inspectors.
The early series of inspections, we were quite often stopped at one side of the wall, which we couldn't see over, at gunpoint, knowing probably full well on the other side of the wall was the information that we wanted to get to. And we were that close. It was so close, you could almost smell it.
Why should they go to the security sites? The Republican Guard is the military power which preserves security in the country and which is used to defend the sovereignty of the country. Why should they enter those sites?
Settle down. Settle down. No, you do not touch my inspector.
The inspectors, referring back to Resolution 687, claimed that they were well within their rights to inspect any site at any time. Suddenly, Iraq and UNSCOM found themselves again on the brink of an international incident.
Naturally, we are very concerned to hear that Ambassador Ekeas and his team have not been able to gain access to a site to the west of Baghdad today, and indeed have met with a flat refusal, which he described as a new dimension.
Well, we are concerned because we believe that it's absolutely essential for the Iraqis to live up to their obligations. And we want to make sure that Ambassador Ekeas has the knowledge that he has the full support of the Security Council in what he is doing, and that the Iraqis understand that support is there, and that they have an obligation to abide by their resolutions.
It was put up or shut up time for the Security Council. We had come to these sites, we had told the Security Council that we were carrying out in this investigation, they had approved this investigation, and we told the Iraqis that if we withdraw, there will be serious consequences. The Iraqis said, we don't care, you're not coming in. So we did withdraw.
But instead of delivering the serious consequences promised by the inspectors, the Security Council sent Rolf Ekéus to attempt a diplomatic solution. The U.S. had been anxious to enforce the warnings of the inspectors, but they were uncertain of how this action would be perceived by the international community.
For whatever reason, the U.S. felt that they didn't have enough justification for this military action based upon the results of the inspection alone, that they needed to give it one more effort. They needed one more piece to complete this puzzle of Iraqi noncompliance, that they would send in Rolf Ekéus, that he, of course, would be rejected by the Iraqis, and then when he left, the U.S. now had a green light to bomb.
Much to the chagrin of the U.S., Ekéus was not turned away by Iraq. Seeking a diplomatic solution, Ekéus joined Tariq Aziz in authoring the modalities for sensitive site inspections. Under these modalities, the Iraqis, in declaring a site sensitive, would be able to limit an inspection team to 4 inspectors and could negotiate the manner in which they inspected the site. However, Iraq could not declare a site sensitive until the team arrived to make its inspection, thereby preventing Iraq from altering the site or removing material while the team was en route.
Iraq had a point, because if it was so that the teams were coming into the vicinity of the president of the country, for instance, any country careful of its sovereignty couldn't accept that.
So when Rolf Ekéus comes back with this diplomatic compromise, there was a lot of frustration in Washington, D.C. They felt that Rolf Ekéus had betrayed them, had sold them out, had sold out UNSCOM, and many people in Washington, D.C. Lost faith in UNSCOM at that point in time. They felt that UNSCOM was no longer a viable inspection organization.
Here you've got Security Council Resolution 687, which is probably the most hard-line resolution ever imparted to a weapons inspection regime. And then you've given it all away in one quick breath. Clearly, it seemed like a good political compromise at the time, but some of the sites that we had to inspect were massive, and you could quite easily be inspecting one building with 4 people, and you could never do the job efficiently or effectively.
The inspectors soon found that the new modalities for the inspection of sensitive sites played almost solely to the advantage of Iraq. Inspectors were repeatedly delayed in their efforts to gain access to inspection sites.
You're violating the modalities. I'm informing you that you are in violation of the modalities and in violation of Security Council resolution. You are not providing us with immediate access to the site per the agreement. But it's a delay. It's a delay. The Security Council resolutions call for immediate and unrestricted access. We're being denied access at this moment. A lot of us had our doubts about whether there was really something being hidden here. But now we were convinced. We didn't have a smoking gun, but there's no way you could explain the way the Iraqis were behaving. They had to be hiding something, and we were very frustrated because we felt there was no way we were going to find this hidden material under the existing rules and regulations. Unless we came up with a new way of doing business, we might as well just give up this game, that it's a go-nowhere proposition. One of the things that we had as a resource was access to defectors from Iraq. We had a growing number of defectors whose information was being made available. And this is sort of a frustrating circumstance for us because we had this great information about sites in Iraq where stuff could be hidden. But we knew if we went to these sites, we'd be stopped. Why not use this Iraqi obstruction against them? We'd move towards a site and the Iraqis would stop us. They're stopping us for a reason. And that reason has to be they're hiding something, they're evacuating something, they're moving it out. So we put a U-2 aircraft overhead. It takes photographs detecting this evacuation. We also could see the Iraqis getting on the phone, making telephone calls, controlling this evacuation. So we put a team of radio intercept operators in place in our headquarters to intercept these communications so we could hear these orders. So when the Iraqis stopped us, suddenly we got a full picture of the scope of concealment. And it was a very successful operation for UNSCOM.
The inspectors made great strides collecting credible data concerning Iraq's use of Special Republican Guard vehicles and personnel in past concealment. But this only served to heighten their suspicions and began to raise more questions than answers.
But having headed down this path of investigating concealment, all we succeeded in doing was raising the suspicion of many inspectors, myself included, and also the United States and Great Britain and Israel, that Iraq was indeed hiding something. We couldn't quantify what they were hiding, but they were hiding something. This, of course, was in direct contrast to the technical results that the inspectors were bringing in from the evaluation of Iraq's the chicken farm documentation, from our own technical evaluation of Iraqi declarations, which said we've probably come to the end in terms of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs.
So I felt that UNSCOM was in excellent shape. I felt we were moving into the monitoring, the quiet, professional, systematic controlling of Iraq's capabilities. Its tasks were very clearly defined. We had the modalities in place which assured us the necessity. It was very clear if we were blocked. So we had a clear situation, and it was a matter of I would say, winding down the concealment process, because I understood, and I think the team working with the concealment, so to say, inspections, understood that there was, what we could achieve was to map out the methods, but we could never expect that we would be, so to say, catching the little what remains. It had to be for Iraq to voluntarily hand it over under the pressure of the inspection regime.
This is a very frustrating thing for Rolf Ekéus. He couldn't give Iraq a clean bill of health because of the existence of concealment, or the concealment mechanism, the reality that something was out there, and he didn't see any way to end this concealment investigation, having started it. I think he realized that he was in a lose-lose situation, and that the best thing he could do for himself personally was to leave UNSCOM and turn the reins over to somebody new who might have better luck.
The Secretary General has accepted with regret the resignation of Rolf Ekéus from the post of Executive Chairman of the United Nations Special Commission.
And there is an element of disappointment that the agenda I set out for the Commission and my team and myself, that was to reach a situation where Security Council could decide to lift the oil embargo and start to relieve the sanctions against Iraq. It is maybe a professional disappointment, but I don't think that is the big deal. It is a big deal is, I think, that the Iraqi people is still a victim of a policy which makes it impossible for the Commission to reach a full clearing out of all the prohibited items in Iraq.
Rolf Ekéus, professionally speaking, he's a very qualified person, but Rolf Ekéus did what the Americans wanted him to do, to stretch out the whole business for more than 5 years. And when he realized that he cannot doing it any more convincingly, he withdrew. If he was an honest United Nations official, he should have, before his resignation, told the truth, wrote a report to the Security Council. I have done this. If he had anything in his mind remaining, he would have said it in precise terms. What he did, he withdrew, left the scene ambiguous, and then came Richard Butler to play the game as if he was starting from the beginning.
Richard Butler, the man chosen to fill the role as UNSCOM's new executive chairman, was a veteran Australian diplomat with extensive credentials in the field of arms control.
Since this process, mandated by the Security Council to work with Iraq to get rid of its weapons of mass destruction, started. That was almost, well, no, 6 years ago. In my definite view, that time has been too long, and we must try to find a way to complete the job that the Security Council has legally mandated, and that's the approach that I'll be taking when I meet with Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, on Wednesday morning.
He said that I'm going to use scientific means, not forensic means, in conducting my job. I said, okay, we welcome that.
But by September, I think he realized that, you know, the people had pretty much run the course in terms of the technical data, that we weren't going to get any more new information, and that you had to deal with the issue of concealment.
Barely 1 month after taking office, Butler signed off on the creation of a new inspection entity, the Capable Site Concealment Investigations Team, or CISIs. The CISI team would outwardly confront presidential security organizations in order to stimulate concealment activity, and then listen in on the communications of senior Iraqi officials as they directed this concealment. Hidden in the back of the CISI team vehicle was a covert communications intercept system, a network of 10 radio receivers, each specifically tuned to a unique frequency that monitored presidential communications. The receivers were linked with digital tape recorders hidden in the inspectors' personal backpacks, transforming the inspectors themselves into walking recording devices. The CSCI team was carrying out one of the most sensitive and controversial programs ever undertaken in the history of UNSCOM: the interception and exploitation of communications involving Saddam Hussein and his closest advisors. The team was instructed by Executive Chairman Richard Butler to pursue a new intelligence tip: the existence of a secret biological unit inside the Special Security Organization, known as Sheen 7.
During UNSCOM 207, we had to conduct an evening inspection of a facility very close to the Republican palace within Baghdad, Saddam's palace. I was leading the convoy. As we started to cross over the junction itself, an Iraqi soldier jumped out into the road, leveled his weapon at the vehicle, and as we drove past him, I heard him actually make the weapon ready.
The soldier turns around, the next vehicle in the convoy is mine. The soldier's in a panic at this point. One car had just pushed through, heading towards a very sensitive area. He was responsible for protecting it. He looks at me, sees my car coming, feels threatened, and he chambers around in his weapon. And he gets down in a position, he starts screaming at the top of his lungs, and he's clearly panicked at this point. There's a second individual, a uniformed Special Security Organization guard, who comes out of his position, sees what's happening, pulls out his pistol, and runs around and levels his pistol at my head.
The next thing I heard was a radio call from Scott in the vehicle behind me to halt. And he was screaming into the radio saying, "Stop, stop, stop," right there. He could see the situation which was unraveling in front of us. We knew we were in an extremely tense situation. Lots of people shouting, lots of soldiers running around. The next thing I was told was to reverse out of that situation very slowly, which we proceeded to do. And I reversed back level with Scott's vehicle. My next orders over the radio to me was stay where you are, do not move, and there were orders to the rest of the convoy as well that everyone was to stay in their vehicles, no one to make any move to get out of the vehicles. And there were some very, very tense moments when no one really knew what was going to happen next, what the reaction of the Iraqi Secret Service, or wrong, the Iraqi military was going to be. A senior Iraqi official came out and liaised with the chief inspector on the ground as to trying to identify where we were going, what we were doing there.
What is the problem? No problem. Where do you want to go? Down this road? No, this is a pass area. How do you dare to ask to enter? The Security Council resolution allows us to inspect the sector. My dear, this is a palace. You know it is out of bounds for us.
Ritter and his inspectors had been stopped tantalizingly close to their target. Although not technically a presidential building, the Al Hayat building was in a presidential area, adjacent to a presidential palace, and as such was deemed off-limits to UNSCOM.
Anwar Rashid looked at me and he said, "Mark my words, you are making a fatal mistake. This will be the death of UNSCOM. Your insistence to try and inspect this facility is the end of UNSCOM. Mark my words."
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I called on the Secretary General of the United Nations this morning, and I informed him of the decision which was taken by the leadership in Iraq. The decision is the following. First, the expulsion of the remaining American individuals who are working with UNSCOM. Secondly, and most importantly, is that Iraq is ready. Iraq is ready to continue its cooperation with UNSCOM. UNSCOM could perform fully its duties inside Iraq with the personnel it has, with any other personnel the executive chairman decides to send, except the Americans.
It's our view that Iraq cannot pick and choose inspectors. It is our view that, once again, Iraq is violating UN Security Council resolutions, that it cannot politicize UNSCOM.
They want to spy on us. They want to report to the United States about what Iraq has and what are Iraq's military capabilities, which has nothing to do with the weapons of mass destruction.
We on the Council must do everything we can to give Ambassador Butler the tools and the support he needs to do his job.
The crisis resulting from the expulsion of American inspectors would cause the U.S. to take an even greater interest in the day-to-day affairs of UNSCOM.
Iraq must let the weapons inspectors get back to their vital work of preventing Iraq from building nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. And it must permit those inspections to proceed without interference or conditions.
Madeleine Albright worked very closely with Yevgeny Primakov, the Prime Minister of Russia, on how to resolve this situation. And the Russians, of course, have very close links with the Iraqi government. Primakov struck a deal in which he convinced the Iraqis to allow the inspectors back into Iraq to include Americans and let them get on with their work. But Primakov promised the Iraqis that he would work very hard to push UNSCOM towards a resolution.
It was our objective at the time. We deal with it constructively. We deal with it positively, not because we believe that they will report to the Security Council that Iraq fulfilled, but to prove to those members within the Security Council, except the British and the Americans, that really we convinced them that Iraq has really fulfilled.
Richard Butler instructed Ritter and the Sisi team to continue with their concealment investigations, despite diminishing returns. In the ensuing months, the CSCI team was sent on a number of inspections that yielded no new information or prohibited materials. One assignment, typical of those suggested by the CIA at the time, sent inspectors to a so-called high-priority target in western Iraq. When inspectors arrived, they were greeted by nothing more than a collection of empty trenches dug into the desert sands.
A lot of the information that we were given was provided to us by the Americans. It was either out of date, it was incorrect, or it was completely false and designed to take us down the wrong sort of path as opposed to the disarmament path.
The primary aim of having us on the ground to be able to react within a moment's notice of any new information coming into New York just wasn't used, and on a few occasions we actually thought we were going to do or be fired off on a credible task. Very often after 2 or 3 days preparation, that task would then be cancelled, and this happened a number of times. It was extremely frustrating.
By early December 1997, the irritated Sisi team took advantage of the lull to send a Christmas message to their senior staff back home. A frustrated Scott Ritter convinced Richard Butler to allow his team to put together a list of credible sites for a new set of inspections.
There was a dinner, Richard Butler, myself, Charles Dolford, Chris Cobb-Smith, in which I once again briefed Richard Butler on the sites that we were going to be inspecting, some very controversial sites related to presidential security. And Butler was concerned. He understood the disarmament reasons for these sites, but he was still holding back. He felt that he didn't have the political backing to carry out these inspections. In the middle of my briefing, the phone call comes in for Charles Dolford, and it's from Sandy Berger, the National Security Advisor of the United States. It says the United States has reviewed the proposed targets, and we give you the green light to send the team in. Butler hears this, signs off on all the mission statements, and here we are, launched on what was supposed to be a United Nations inspection, but now we've got the United States calling the shots, not UNSCOM. And the reason why they're calling the shots aren't to further disarmament, but rather to set up confrontation that can be used as a trigger for military action.
Good morning. Good morning, Senator.
Rather than letting the inspection run its course and allowing the inspectors to create a confrontation over the issue of access, that is, to have an inspection team try to get into a facility and be stopped by the Iraqis said, the hell with it. We know what you're trying to do. We're just not going to cooperate with you at all. You can't even leave your facility. You're going to be parked out in front of your headquarters, and we're just not going to come out and deal with you. We're going to ignore you. It's now 9:19, and no personnel from the National Monitoring Directorate have shown up. Therefore, once again, I'm compelled to postpone the inspection.
Further undermining U.S. attempts to cause confrontation, the Iraqis focused the crisis on the American inspectors, and in particular, on Scott Ritter.
Allegations about me being a spy are ridiculous. I work at the pleasure of Richard Butler, the executive chairman of the Special Commission.
Nevertheless, Richard Butler withdrew Ritter from Baghdad at the request of the U.S.
This is a dispute between Iraq and the United Nations and the UN Security Council. This is not a verbal and intellectual battle between the United States and Iraq.
The Americans weren't ready to go to war over the issue of whether or not Scott Ritter can get into a site. They were willing to go to war over the issue of whether or not UNSCOM could get into a site. So they started talking about presidential sites, the need to get into presidential sites. They started talking about these massive presidential palaces. What are the Iraqis hiding in these presidential palaces? Why won't they let inspectors in there? Maybe there's something there. So UNSCOM must be allowed to inspect presidential sites. That became the whole focus of our effort from that point on.
Pushed by the United States to intervene, the Secretary General Kofi Annan traveled to Baghdad, where he met with Saddam Hussein and brokered an agreement designed to bring an end to the crisis.
I have concluded an agreement with the government of Iraq on the issue of the United Nations weapons inspections.
UNSCOM never wanted to inspect these presidential sites. I don't believe anyone in UNSCOM actually believed there were going to be weapons of mass destruction hidden in any of these compounds. But UNSCOM were driven to exercise their right to go anywhere and inspect anything, and therefore the decision was made to drop a list of a certain number of presidential sites, which then an international team of UN monitors or inspectors would then go in and examine these facilities.
The United States immediately, having encouraged Kofi Annan to go to Iraq and to strike this deal, now is pushing UNSCOM to challenge this agreement.
There's a certain sense of exasperation with Saddam Hussein's recalcitrance, and if he doesn't follow through this time, I think that it's very clear there'll be very serious consequences.
And so I was told to draft up a plan, and I did. I drafted up a plan for the resumption of inspections. We took it to the White House. We went to the Situation Room in the White House, and we briefed the senior national security team of the United States on our plan. They accepted it, but they wanted one site added, the Ministry of Defense.
The Ministry of Defense was a site that many inspectors in UNSCOM had wanted to pursue for years. However, both Rolf Ekéus and Richard Butler had deemed the site far too inflammatory and were never convinced that there was enough evidence to risk a crisis. Butler and Ritter were summoned to Ambassador Bill Richardson's office in the U.S. mission.
It's myself, Richardson, Butler, Dulfer, and the Deputy U.S. Ambassador. Butler gets up, walks over to a chalkboard, and draws a line down the middle. He writes inspection timeline, U.S. action. He draws down the dates, and he circles a date. And he turns to me and he goes, "You got to provoke a confrontation by this date so the U.S. can bomb by this date." And I went, "What do you mean, provoke a confrontation?" "You have to do the Ministry of Defense here because the U.S., after you do that, has to start bombing, and they only have 5 days to bomb. And they have to finish the bombing by this date because it's Ramadan." It's amazing. You have a United Nations official, the executive chairman of the Special Commission, sitting there telling his chief inspector to go to Iraq, provoke a confrontation, so that the United States can bomb without the authority of the Security Council. It will be purely a unilateral bombing mission by the United States. It was ridiculous. But I went ahead and carried out the inspection because that's my job. I'm a weapons inspector. I was chief inspector, and I was told to go into Iraq and do a mission. But I guarantee you the mission I was going to do was going to be conducted within the framework of the mandate given to me by the Security Council, not the unilateral instructions of the United States, even if those instructions came through the person of Richard Butler.
They sent Mr. Scott Ritter, they instructed Mr. Scott Ritter to inspect the Ministry of Defense. And the intention was that Iraq will definitely not allow the team to inspect.
We show up at the gates and the Iraqis say, "You can't come in. It's too sensitive. This is the ultimate symbol of sovereignty." Amr Rashid shows up on site. I talk with Amr Rashid. He understands that they have to let us in. I made that point very clear.
Iraq understood from experience that this is a politically motivated inspection. It has nothing to do with documentation. It has nothing to do with proving that Iraq has fulfilled or not fulfilled. It's purely to undermine the MOU between Iraq and the Secretary General. So Iraq, and I was representing the government of Iraq on the side, agreed to conditions which are very harmful to Iraq's sovereignty, but we agreed to prove to the whole public opinion, whole world, that Iraq has nothing to hide. So we asked Mr. Scott Ritter and his team to enter the Ministry of Defense.
And we spent many, many hours inspecting the facility of the Ministry of Defense with substantially more than the 4 inspectors laid down in the modalities. But there was nothing in there.
It didn't matter what kind of orders they gave me to precipitate a conflict. As long as I did my job, I'm safe. And I felt that there was still a job to be done, that there was still room for me to maneuver. It was becoming increasingly difficult. The United States was not being very cooperative with the work I was trying to get done, especially after I pull out of Iraq without causing the war that they wanted.
Ritter's actions led to a new conflict between himself, the United States, and his own boss, Richard Butler, this time over the issue of the top-secret signal-gathering operations that were still being undertaken by the CSCI team.
I came back from Iraq, and I immediately found out that the U.S. was orchestrating having this intelligence capability removed from my team, removed from me, and turned over completely to the United States. This is plainly unacceptable. I confronted Richard Butler directly about this. I said, boss, you can't do this. All along, we fought to make sure that we could never be successfully charged with carrying out espionage on behalf of any member state. And one of the keys to the SIGINT operation is total control of the effort by the Special Commission, by my team. I was the one entrusted to do this. I'm the expert, my team's the expert, and what have you done? You've shut it down and you've turned it over to the United States. We no longer have control over the process. This is nothing but espionage. We cannot be involved in this. You must shut this operation down. Richard Butler refused to do so. What he did instead is shut down my team, closed down the operation of the SISI team, and turned over its capabilities to the United States.
What I want to say is this, that yesterday Scott Ritter handed me his letter of resignation. I read it, I talked with him about it. It was clear to me that the best course of action was for me to accept it.
You know, I was disillusioned by the reality that what I and hundreds of others of inspectors like myself had spent 7 years creating, that is a legitimate organization carrying out legitimate activities in the name of the Security Council, was all for naught, that it was going to be destroyed because the United States no longer found legitimate inspection activities to be convenient for their own hidden objectives of removing Saddam Hussein from power.
In the ensuing months, Iraq and the Security Council wrestled with the issue of access to sites and the composition of inspection teams. At the end of October, Iraq once again ceased all cooperation with UNSCOM.
The weapons themselves were destroyed. The weapons and the capability to produce them. And the others, as I said, were under full, intrusive, stringent monitoring. During the whole years of 1991, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8, 7 and 8, the Security Council didn't take any step towards easing the sanctions. It was the United States which refused any step to be taken in that direction.
For these long years of cooperation between Iraq and UN, between Iraq and UNSCOM, a lot have been done in order to destroy, to dismantle the new Iraqi programs of weapons of mass destruction. And unfortunately, there have been no real positive moves from the Security Council, from the UN to recognize these achievements.
It was so obvious to everybody, this is a game, a political game. It has no grounds to the resolution 687. So Iraq started to gain momentum politically, and it proved to everybody that Iraq has fulfilled. And now it is the turn of the Americans in the Security Council to admit that Iraq has fulfilled its obligation.
Iraq does know what needs to be done. We've given them the list of remaining disarmament requirements. They can do this the legal and orthodox way by cooperating with us, or it seems there'll be big trouble.
Once again, under the threat of U.S. military aggression, Saddam reluctantly agreed to let UNSCOM continue its work. Richard Butler chose Roger Hill to lead the next inspection, UNSCOM 258.
I think that going into it, I had a sense, even though it was unsaid, that if Iraq did not comply with the requirements of the Special Commission to allow us access into certain areas, then the consequences would be quite severe. And I think that the US had made that position eminently clear to Iraq prior to the inspection taking place.
When I found out Roger was coming to New York to prepare to go in, I went out to dinner with him, and we had a long discussion about what he was getting involved in, and I cautioned him. I said, Roger, you know, you've been part of UNSCOM since 1991. You and I both know that we fought long and hard to preserve the independent character of UNSCOM. Be careful, friend. I think you're being used. I think your inspection team is a setup. I think are going to be used to precipitate a military conflict with Iraq.
Our position is that the chaos modalities you were talking about in terms of sensitive site are being enforced because clearly that...
Without consulting the Security Council, Richard Butler informed Roger Hill that the ECAIS modalities for sensitive sites were not to apply during UNSCOM 258.
As far as the Executive Chairman is concerned, those modalities are not enforced at the moment.
I think I want to ask you, please, directly, if you believe that these modalities are not enforced, you would believe like that?
That's absolutely.
This is not the case.
Richard's instructions to me were essentially that the sensitive site modalities were not to apply. Iraq had agreed to the original 687 requirements, which was basically immediate, unconditional, unrestricted access. And that was, on that basis, I started my inspection program.
Well, you understand our position on sensitive site inspection.
I asked you, and you understand our position.
Yes.
Okay. We think that the modalities for inspecting sensitive sites are still valid. Okay. And there are some modifications which Mr. Butler asked for, and it was agreed upon. For example, the number of inspectors could be increased more than 4. Okay.
My understanding.
And if there is a necessity for any measures, it could be discussed between both sides. We have no objection to enter now, you and 3 or 4 of your inspectors to start inspection.
There was a trend always to create crises, to touch our dignity, to touch our security. And there was also, in some exercises, installation to our people and to our mentalities. So I think the non-trust relation between both sides was because of UNSCOM behavior.
The game was clear to us. It's a pretext used in order to continue the situation without any final settlement to it.
Your position is that sensitive site modalities are enforced. My position at the moment, the instructions are given to me, is that that's not the case. Now, in order to get on with my work for today, what I want to do is go in, have a look around, and maybe we used this term the other day, be flexible about this site so that we can get the job done. And we can worry about the issue, you know, in a political sense, whether the UCOLIS is sensitive, whether the chairman disagrees with that position later on. I just want to go and do the job.
Well, we do the job, but according to the sensitive model. Okay? There is no ECAIS sensitive size model, nor Butler sensitive size model. There are sensitive size models according to the agreement between Iraq and the Special Commission. The chairman is the chairman. There is nothing personality, whether ECAIS or Butler.
Sure, I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying
there is no personality, whether Mr. Tariq Aziz or Mr. Amr Mohammed Rashid or Mr. Amr Saadi. It is Iraqi government. It is an agreement between the Iraqi government and the Special Commission.
If you throw away modalities, you couldn't ask Iraq to stay on its signed undertaking. Even if we didn't sign any, I declared the modalities. But I saw that as my word, and that the word on behalf of UN, on behalf of UNSCOM. That's how we would do it. We will stay. Of course, if someone would like to change it, they have to accept that the contract is broken.
I think you want to touch it, you want to destroy this modalities. This step is political. When you are saying that I will go inside with the number of my inspectors, this means that you want to
make it practically invalid.
No, we want to make it...
I sense this, Mr. Roger.
No. We're trying to make a practical accommodation.
And you are trying to create a problem in this situation between Iraq and the United States of America and the threat of military aggression. But we are stick on the legal interpretation of the agreement between Iraqi government and the special commission.
Okay. Let me be very clear.
Yes.
I'm not interested in any words of aggression about America. I'm not American. I'm here as a member of the United Nations doing a job. This is about access, and we have been delayed outside this site now for 2 hours. Iraq promised the Security Council that it would provide access to members of the inspection teams in the performance of their duties. I understand your position, Mr. Hassam Amin, but at this time I will be withdrawing my team back to the B&B session.
It's up to you.
Thank you.
The Iraqis have said that your team did not follow the modalities for special site inspections. Is there any truth to that, or?
Well, it's interesting. Iraq has sent out several messages today about their blockage. One began by criticizing us. The other seemed to back off. I don't know which Iraqi message is the authentic one, but I do know this. What we did was right. What they did was wrong. And as I said, I'll wrap all that up in my report to the Security Council, the Secretary General of the Security Council next week.
All I can say at this point is that we're going into the council to discuss the special commission report from last night.
Concerned about the imminence of the airstrikes?
I think everybody is concerned. It looks like the United States is determined to go for a military strike, regardless of what the Security Council membership feel about it. And that's very bad.
China is strongly opposed to any act of power politics that unilaterally resorts to the use or threat of the use of force in international relations while circumventing the Council.
Enforcement of peacekeeping operations which are justified in such conditions can be implemented only through a decision of the Security Council and under its tight political and appropriate operative control.
I have heard that there have been suggestions, including amongst some of you, that the timing of this report and the purpose of this report was in some way structured to suit United States purposes. That is utterly wrong.
I think that the whole work of UNSCOM, especially during the last 3 weeks, was heavily influenced by the United States in order to reach out to this conclusion.
The disagreement between UNSCOM and Iraq should be resolved through dialogue and consultations. There is absolutely no excuse or pretext to use force against Iraq.
In the eyes of many in the Security Council, Operation Desert Fox demolished UNSCOM's credibility, allowing the United States to single-handedly undermine the integrity of the United Nations. Richard Butler found himself increasingly isolated and resigned in June of 1999. Neither he nor the UNSCOM inspectors would ever again return to Iraq.
It is not the international community that is keeping the Iraqi children and people from eating. It is Saddam Hussein.
Personally, I don't want to be pessimistic, but this is the reality. The reality that America is preventing the Security Council from dealing fairly with Iraq.
You do not punish people. You do not punish innocent children and adults of a country because of the crimes committed by their leadership. And that's, of course, what we're doing in Iraq. The economy is in tatters, massive unemployment, total breakdown of healthcare, social services, huge problems with child mortality, massive malnutrition throughout the country, both children and adults, and political consequences, which we're all going to have to live with in the years ahead.
It's said that hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children are dying. In the first place, I doubt the figures. I believe nothing that comes out of Iraqi official circles, nothing. And they're ready to go to any lengths to dissimulate and fool outsiders. So I'm very cautious about reading reports.
Well, you know, it's very difficult to verify all of the figures that are used, and they range from, I think, 1 million to 1.5. One answer to that is that it doesn't matter whether it's 1 or 1.5. 1 is also far too many. 500,000 is too many. 1,000 is too many.
The Security Council should do its deal. What promised to Iraq, what they signed vis-à-vis Iraq regarding 687. They should lift the sanctions. Once sanctions are lifted, Iraq would continue to abide by the resolutions, 687 and relevant resolutions.
We have now filled all the managerial positions and a good deal of the other positions. We have run one training course for those we have recruited in the summer, and we are now going to start a second training course for inspectors, which covers not only discipline-specific things in the field of biology and in chemistry, etc., but also culture of Iraq, the history of Iraq, the resolutions, etc., so that our staff will have a good background when they get to work.
$1284 is a roadmap, and the key here is Dr. Blix and Unmavik, and he says he's ready to go in. It's up to Saddam Hussein. As I say, you know, it's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. The key's on the table. All he has to do is pick it up.
Well, as you know, we did not deal with Resolution 1284 from the very beginning, and we made our position clear that this resolution is not a solution to the problem. It does not lead to lifting the sanctions.
UNSCOM, using its technical assessments, had been saying since 1995 that we had fundamentally disarmed Iraq. There wasn't anything of significance remaining, but this wasn't good enough. Clearly, that calculus has to change. The Security Council has to come up with a new way of evaluating the situation that allows qualitative judgments to come into play.
I don't think they've been gotten rid of. I think that Saddam has done everything possible, a great sacrifice to his country and indeed even to himself, to hold on to weaponry. In other words, he's forgone well over $100 billion in revenue in order to keep his hands on the weapons. So if by some miracle he doesn't have them today, he will have them tomorrow.
I think the biggest misperception out there today in the United States is that Iraq represents a threat to the American people and to the national security interests of the United States. Iraq is a defanged tiger. It's a nation that has a devastated economy. It's a nation that has virtually no meaningful military capacity. And for us to array our considerable wealth and power against Iraq is unfortunate, not only for the Iraqi people, but for the United States. There's much better things we could be doing with our money and our time, besides pursuing a brutal dictator to the point of debasing our own moral and intellectual values.
The Secretary General acknowledged for the first time that the battle of words is being lost, and it's not Saddam Hussein who is now held responsible for the unnecessary deaths of thousands, hundreds of thousands of children and adults. It's the United Nations itself. And he lamented this fact because He, quoted the Charter in a sense, which says that the United Nations is there to protect the well-being of people, not to destroy their lives and not to kill their children.